Hello, I'm Orkhan Amashov. Welcome to Context. Although Central Asia is not at the top of the pecking order of imminent priorities for the new administration in Washington, D.C., it is also increasingly clear that under President Donald Trump, US will probably need to formulate a new coherent policy for the region to advance its own interests. It could well be said that over the past 2 decades or so, the significance attached by the United States to Central Asia was closely connected with Afghanistan and the necessity of conducting military operations therein, which required cooperation with the regional actors. A relatively recent policy paper published by the Hudson Institute based in Washington, D.C. suggests that in view of diminished US interests in Afghanistan, signs of a broader disengagement with what is the heart of the Eurasian landmass are also being observed, with this potentially having the trappings of a premonition of further geopolitical retrenchment. Nevertheless, what is also abundantly clear to everybody that the last officially announced US strategy regarding Central Asia, published in February 2020 during Trump's first term, was the product of a different age with different challenges and priorities. Therefore, is now in need of being reassessed to fit the bill. It should also be noted that a more proactive US foreign policy vis-à-vis Central Asia will also need to take into account what many regard as a critical bridging role played by the South Caucasus and Azerbaijan as part of this very region. For the 5 Central Asian countries forming the region, see Azerbaijan as a way to connect to the outside world, obviating the necessity of going through Russia or China. Today I'm joined by a panel of guests of substantial knowledge and expertise on this very subject. Richard Spooner, member of the advisory board at the Caspian Policy Center, joining from Astana, Kazakhstan. Dimash Aljanov, political analyst, joining from Almaty, Kazakhstan. And Janet Mamunkulov, political analyst, joining from Astana, Kazakhstan. Welcome to all of you.
Hello there.
Thank you. Mr. Spooner, what are those components that US should change or rethink about its Central Asian policy?
Well, I would choose to look at what I think their priorities are right now. I think that when the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, talked about Central Asia in at his Senate hearings, that's already perhaps more attention than an incoming administration has paid to Central Asia through these years that you've just mentioned. You mentioned critical minerals. That's obviously very important. Kazakhstan has an abundance of critical minerals, as does Uzbekistan. So I believe they'll be developed. The question is, are they going to be processed anywhere other than in China? Because if they're processed in China, then China controls their disposition. So I think that's a very important thing.
Well, that's one component, of course. And what are other elements in relation to which you think that Washington, D.C. will need to take more proactive approach, apart from the energy component involving rare earth minerals?
Well, what I'm most interested in is in seeing how the Trump administration interacts with Central Asia and Moscow. Because we've already seen signs that the Trump administration is in close contact with Moscow. They're holding negotiations on ending the war in Ukraine with Moscow, but without the EU or Ukraine present. It's very important issues for Central Asia.
Indeed. Mr. Aljanov, do you believe that Central Asia, despite its claimed strategic importance, has quite often been overlooked by successive US administrations? Recently, I think that paper to which I referred, a paper published by Hudson Institute, reminded us that no sitting US president has ever visited Central Asia, and only a handful of cabinet-level visits have taken place over the past 2 decades. What does this signify, you think?
Well, I'm quite skeptical about the future of our relations with the United States here. in the previous administration, we already got a feeling that the United States a bit abandoning the region. And in the coming years, I mean, you know what's happening now in Ukraine, and we don't know what kind of future will be after the reconciliation, the peace talks, whether Russia will gain some advantage and try to stimulate the integration process and keeping the Central Asian countries and particularly Kazakhstan much closer to itself. So in this regard, I think that's, and my recent meetings with US officials, I've got a feeling that there is no clear understanding what they're going to do with the Central Asia. And I think the Trump administration particularly doesn't have the idea. So this article that you're referring to is more than the ideal picture and what could be done. But I think now, at the current stage, we are really, really far from this picture.
Yeah, that paper to which I referred is just a policy paper published by the Hudson Institute. It's not an official document which will guide US foreign policy in connection with Central Asia. Mr. Mamunkulov, earlier, Mr. Spooner mentioned about the US-Russia talks on Ukraine, and we also talked about perceived US abandonment of Central Asia. But still, there are certain views to the effect that if a balanced strategy towards the region to be maintained, this balanced strategy would prioritize security, counterterrorism, energy and trade over some other elements that were central to the previous administrations. If that is going to be the case, how will this impact the circumstances on the ground and wider US Central Asia dynamics?
Thank you for the question. I don't expect that the US Central Asian relations will broaden or widen in the next coming years. And you mentioned the Ukrainian talks. I think definitely these talks will have impact on the balance of power in the region. We expect some repercussions of the future talks results. As for the security and energy, we have mutual interests with Europe and the United States concerning the extraction of the critical minerals and the oil and gas and so on and so forth. I think that we have to wait the talks, and then we have to recalibrate our strategy. You know that US strategy in the region was published in 2020. At the same time, Kazakhstan's foreign policy concept was published at the same year. So I think that both sides should renew their approach according to the situation, which is changing very fast.
Mr. Spooner, let's look at those key areas that US administration will need to prioritize during Trump's second term. So we always talk about US-China confrontation in the wider sense of this word. And Central Asia is one of those areas where China and US are competing against each other. We also know that although from the point of view of maintained by Trump's administration, the real danger, as long as US geopolitical interests are concerned, emanate from China, not from Russia. We also understand that US probably would not be in favor of Russia increasing its geopolitical clout in Central Asia. So now we have this situation wherein Chinese influence in Central Asia is exponentially increasing. When you look at the cumulative trade turnover between China and 5 Central Asian countries, and this is happening to the detriment of Russian economic clout. So China is getting stronger against Russia. And bearing in mind that for Trump, it is China that is a real opponent of United States. How will he navigate this complexity in Central Asia, wherein China is emerging even stronger?
Yes, I think it's clear that of Kazakhstan's two powerful neighbors, China is the more powerful. And lately, Russia has looked very clearly as the weaker of the two. Of course, that dynamic is going to change now, I believe, simply because the Trump administration, I believe, is going to maintain very close relations with Russia. I mean, it used to be that the only thing in Washington that united Democrats and Republicans was a very aggressive policy toward Russia. I don't think that's true anymore. I think in terms of the competition, it's, of course, difficult for the United States to really compete with China in Central Asia. China's integration into the economy, their volume of business, and also their influence in Central Asia is far stronger than that of the United States. So as I mentioned, I think that the United States will be trying to do business, be transactional about critical minerals. Mm-hmm. And the key thing, yes, if the Trump administration and Mr. Putin become very close, then that does change a little bit the dynamic between Russia and China. Instead of Russia looking like China's little brother here, they could become more of an independent player if they're standing next to Washington.
Mr. Aljanov, in view of the ongoing US-Russia talks on Ukraine and the likelihood of a possible US-Russia consensus regarding Central Asia, what will be the position maintained by China regarding this region, you think?
Well, it's difficult to predict, but China has its advantages over the Russia. Yes, Russia traditionally well present, well connected with the Kazakh regime, and the recent developments during the January 22 shows how the two regimes have very close ties, and the Russia basically provides some sort of security. But the China has economic capacity. And in the coming years, if the sanctions will stay on Russia, so the China may have used this opportunity to increase its presence in Kazakh economy, and especially in the area of critical minerals, as it was mentioned before. Yeah. So, but it also depends in what condition the Russian economy will be. So, yes, politically well present, Russia well present in Kazakhstan, but it has little capacity to get more into the critical mineral extraction sector, for instance. So, the peace talks, I think, and if this U.S. administration agree with China, or with Russia, sorry, in some sort of divide the spheres of influence. And of course, it will be then between Russia and China how they're going to make deals, or they share the certain areas of Kazakh economy by the investing in the different sectors and etc.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Mamunkulov, well, one of the key elements within this whole debate revolves around energy, about the transport routes, about the connectivity agenda largely. And some of the arguments made over the past few years about the middle corridor, about this route, transport corridor connecting China with Europe, avoiding Russia and Iran, was effectively based on the assumption that the war in Ukraine will continue for some considerable time. European countries and the United States will be completely averse to the circumstances wherein Russia would have found itself benefiting from this connectivity agenda. And now, in view of what is likely to happen, which is a deal on Ukraine, this also means some sort of normalization between US and Russia, and perhaps with Europe and Russia. Will it undermine what we like to call geopolitical strategic autonomy enjoyed by Central Asia? If so, what is the counterbalance to that?
If I understand you well, I think that there's a contradiction. From one hand, I think that this China-European Union logistics route is beneficial for Central Asia and Azerbaijan,
Absolutely.
and even the West. But from the other hand, some experts say that this is not beneficial for the United States. So it's a contradiction. So I think that we have to look at it and I think that these projects, China-European Union projects, in ideal terms, it's beneficial for Central Asia. But in reality, we don't know to much extent we can realize it, right, through the Caspian Sea. So a lot of hurdles, as you see. It's not easy to transport the oil through the Caspian Sea. So we see and watch.
Mr. Spooner, the many policy papers that published over the past few years always emphasize that US should explore opportunities for expanding oil and gas projects and developing new transit routes. And there was a specific emphasis on the Trans-Caspian gas pipeline that would connect Turkmenistan's natural gas reserves to European markets. To what extent, although this project itself is criticized by some people as being not so practicable, bearing in mind certain geographical limitations and problems related to logistics, to what extent this whole idea that US should be very forceful in terms of increasing the regional autonomy of Central Asia, connecting Central Asia with Europe via different transit routes, is now being somewhat damaged by what we are observing in the context of US-Russia rapprochement?
I think that's definitely true. I think the autonomy of Central Asia that you mentioned in your previous question is conditional and limited because of Kazakhstan's two biggest neighbors. It's not a matter of Kazakhstan particularly, but all of Central Asia are not really autonomous. They're strongly influenced by China and by Russia. The United States is a long way away. Plus, the United States government cannot dictate what US corporations invest in and where they invest it. Unlike, say, what could happen in China or in Russia, where the state can direct investments in line with its geopolitical priorities and foreign relations. Of course, President Trump is a whole new situation, and he's historically, as head of state, been rather unpredictable. So we'll have to see what his main moves are right now. But I don't think that the United States can be forceful, literally, about making Central Asia autonomous. And I don't think that President Trump's administration will see that as a priority at all.
Yeah, we already mentioned that it is not at the top of the pecking order of imminent priorities. The question is, may it emerge more important than it is today? And from your answer, it's very clear we have not been provided with enough evidence to think it may eventually. And Mr. Aljanov, of course, whatever may happen in Central Asia, still that concept of regional autonomy and the connection with Azerbaijan, all of those things are there to stay. Azerbaijan being a Turkic country, also the very critical connecting member of the Organization of Turkic States, is positively received in the midst of Central Asian countries. And with the necessity of, assuming that Trump will need to reconsider a couple of components regarding its foreign policy regarding Central Asia. Will this also, in what way and shape could we expect corresponding changes vis-à-vis Azerbaijan in this context and the whole region of South Caucasus?
Well, I think now that Kazakhstan is one of the countries who's trying to build up the connections with Azerbaijan, it seemed very positive here from Central Asia, and especially in terms of this middle corridor. But I don't think that the United States much interested to develop these trade routes alternatively, basically getting some advantage, giving some advantage to China. So my understanding among these diplomats here in Kazakhstan that the Europeans are very much to support the relations between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan and supporting the project, infrastructure project, but not the United States. So in this connection, I think that the relations between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan will be developed by the both countries, two regimes. They both have mutual understanding of the importance of these trade routes. But I'm not sure that the United States will be part of this. And again, you see, there is a big uncertainty among the U.S. officials. They still don't know. I mean, the 1 month passed after the new administrations came to the power. So, and there is still no clarity what they're going to do with Central Asia. So I wouldn't expect much in this term from the United States.
I see. Mr. Mamunkulov, it is very clear that in the light of the shifting sands of larger Eurasia, certain important developments are taking place, and quite clearly the sense that many have is that we are in the presence of a big change. We can discern the linchpins of this change, but we are not entirely sure where it will lead to. In the context of wider Central Asia, what sorts of developments do you think could increase its geopolitical stature, which is presently, from the prism of the United States, is viewed in a more restricted scope? What sort of developments do you think that could change the current perception dominating those policymakers who are influencing US foreign policy, in other words?
Yeah, very difficult question you ask it. I think that we, as a country, Kazakhstan and Central Asian states, we try to pursue multivectoral, balanced foreign policy.
Yeah.
I think in the next period, we will try to do so, continue to do so, but I think that it might be more difficult to pursue that policy because of the US-Russia rapprochement and growing China relations and possible fissures between China and Russia concerning Central Asia, and by the rising role of the Islamism in Afghanistan and the new rising role of India. And of course, we are talking about the organization of Turkic states with the stronger role of Turkey. Now we will try to balance the powers, their interests, their zones of influences. But only time will show us to what extent we can maintain that balance. Now we need some kind of small union of Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, and then we have to engage with other middle powers like India, Turkey, maybe Israel, maybe Japan and South Korea, Poland, and so on and so forth. Now we call ourselves as a middle power, but it's just words, right? But in order to be a regional power, we have to get united. This organization of Turkic states is one of the elements of that.
Yeah.
So I think that China is a factor, so we can play with China.
to all of you. I'm so grateful to you. Of course, the subject we're discussing is incredibly complex, of course. There are dynamics and quite often mutually not necessarily inclusive but also exclusive dynamics when you look at that triangle involving US, Russia and China, and also the self-interest of Central Asian countries, and with Azerbaijan and other countries of the region coming into the equation. It looks like an incredibly complicated landscape wherein it's incredibly difficult to establish the fundamental logic, because quite often you have one fundamental logic and then deviating logics, and then you could try to establish the commonality. I'm so grateful to you for your time and for your very, very extensive and, if I may say, very deep answers. So grateful to all of you. Well, today I've conversed with Richard Spooner from the Caspian Policy Center, Mr. Dimash Aljanov, political analyst, and also Mr. Janat Mamunkulov, political analyst. All of them joined from Kazakhstan. See you very soon indeed.